You're listening to Hoedown History, where we explore the history and legends of America's old-time and bluegrass tunes. One Christmas, I got my wife one of those old record players from the early 1900s. You know, the kind you wind up with that big metal horn. It's hard to find records for it because it has to have that red rooster on the label or it won't work. But when I visit an old record shop, I'll ask if they have anything I can play on this thing, and they'll point to some far off, dusty bin in the corner somewhere, and I'll proceed to dig through. Now, most of the tunes from this era are old Tin Pan Alley or Vaudeville songs, with a few Hawaiian or World War I songs thrown in. But once I came across an old record with a very familiar title, Down Yonder, and I was like, huh. I thought, well, it can't be the bluegrass tune. This is an old vaudeville band. Probably the familiar case of same name, different song. But sure enough, when I got back home, I played the song.
Down yonder, someone beckons to me. Down yonder, someone reckons on me. I seem to see a racing memory.
And yup, that's definitely Down Yonder. So, of course, being the music nerd that I am, I started digging, and I found a bunch of cool and surprising stuff about the history of this song. So, let's dive in. Our story doesn't begin in Kentucky or West Virginia, or even the British Isles, but in Russia. Enter this man, one Louis Wolfe Gilbert, born in Odessa, Russia in 1886. Gilbert came to the United States as a young boy and initially worked as an actor and singer on the vaudeville circuit. By the early 1910s, he was writing lyrics as well as writing for the New York Clipper, a newspaper aimed at the theatrical community. Now, in 1912, Gilbert wrote a certain scathing review on a song he had heard called When Ragtime Rosie Ragged the Rosary by one Louis Muir. Gilbert, although being Jewish, accused Muir of sacrilege for having dared to incorporate the rosary into a raggy time song. At some point, Muir and Gilbert met in person, which quickly led to an argument, almost resorting to a full-on fistfight, until Muir challenged Gilbert to, no folks, not a duel, but a song-off. He invited him to come home with him and write a song with him if he thought he could do any better. Well, they did, and this is what the two men came up with. It had that Tin Pan Alley ragtime melody, accompanied by lyrics that were chock full of nostalgia of the Old South with the Mississippi River, riverboats, and rural life. Because, of course, that's what two men living in New York City write songs about. It was titled Waiting for the Robert E. Lee, and this song would go on to be an instant national hit. You're listening to it right now. This type of music was big at the time. It made its rounds through the vaudeville stage circuit and was eventually recorded by famous artists from Jelly Roll Morton and King Oliver to Bix Beiderbecke and Louis Armstrong. Now fast forward several years later. After the success of Robert E. Lee, Gilbert continued to write a bunch of songs, but none of them really took off like Robert E. Lee. So eventually he did what most artists do and make a sequel to the first hit. He would keep the same theme as Robert E. Lee, keeping with similar lyrics harkening back to an idyllic Old South. And yeah, even the melody was super similar. So in 1920, he released this new song calling it, yeah, you know, Down Yonder. Now the song would go on to make a modest tour of the vaudeville circuit, but that catchy melody is what really had a life of its own. And that melody rapidly became more commonly performed as an instrumental, especially on piano and organ. Though a popular tune, it never really became an all-out hit at the time. It eventually would, but in a more unexpected way. Through the 1920s, the song is performed or found in thousands of copies of sheet music spread around the country. And we don't really know all the details, but it eventually found its way into the ears and bows of the old-time fiddlers who had discovered it. They dropped the lyrics and transformed it into a hoedown, increasing the tempo, squaring off the more jagged Tin Pan Alley edges, and giving it that more danceable drive. In 1926, the first known commercial recording of the tune in the old-time hoedown style was recorded in Atlanta by the Scottsdale String Band. But the biggest break came in 1934. In that year, Gid Tanner and his Skillet Lickers released an album with two songs on it. On one side, Back Up and Push, and you can listen to my other YouTube video on that one if you want more info on the history of that tune, link below. And on the other side, yep, Down Yonder, which you're listening to right now. And folks, I can't overstate how popular this album was. It was the third best-selling country music record in its initial release year, and eventually sold over 1 million copies. That's 1 million, folks, for an old-time string band. It was so successful that RCA kept making this record until 1960. Well, this version traveled far. Through records, radio, and just good old imitation, it became the way countless musicians learned the tune. For many fiddlers, the Skillet Lickers' take wasn't just a version, it was kind of the version. Numerous other old-time bands would go on to perform and record it, and it also became a staple in the Texas round and square dance world, where the melody would be smoothed out even more and make it a perfect fit for those kinds of dance forms. You're listening to a recording of a version of this Texas style now. Notice how the rhythm is evened out even more. Fast forward to the 1950s. This tune doesn't die, folks. In 1951, Del Wood, the Honky Tonk country pianist, released a version of Down Yonder that took the country by storm and hit number 4 on the Billboard. The tune caught on quick in this form, and other country acts followed up with their own versions of Down Yonder, which also reached to the top of the charts. And if you take all the Down Yonder arrangements that hit the Billboard and added them up that year, well, it becomes number 1. But the 1950s wasn't the last decade for Down Yonder. There would be another resurgence in the 1970s as well, this time in the bluegrass world. Like many popular old-time fiddle tunes, numerous bluegrass acts would follow up with their versions of Down Yonder. But probably nothing does more to solidify this tune in the bluegrass arena than that infamous recording made in 1972, called, you probably guessed it, Will the Circle Be Unbroken, that classic album by the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band. And if you haven't listened to this album before, it's a must, with an absolute all-star cast. The album producer even intentionally kept the recording machines running to capture some of that great side banter as the musicians were just chatting and joking around in the studio. And right before Vassar Clements kicks into Down Yonder, you can hear Doc Watson saying he's going to do an old Skillet Lickers number, and the recording came out as pure gold. And I haven't met a flat picker who hasn't heard it or been influenced by it. While Down Yonder became a fiddle tune standard, the origin of the song's history was almost completely lost. One funny story recounted by Art Rosenbaum relates a story about where the name came from Georgian Uncle John Patterson. Patterson was completely unaware that the song was a popular Tin Pan Alley number before it was known as a fiddle tune. It seems that at a fiddlers convention held in Atlanta in the 1920s, Patterson was with Gid Tanner and some of the other Skillet Lickers members and told his version of where Down Yonder came from. He recounts, "Well, one day I was there with the banjo, and I was very small at the time. I just wanted to be around those Skillet Licker guys and play with them. And they'd say, 'Come on in, Uncle John.' And I'd be sort of timid and sit down and, well, we'd tear it apart. And they'd been working on this melody for a while, but nobody knew what to call it. And then I broke a string, and I says, 'I got to go down yonder and get another string.' And they said, 'That's it, down yonder.' And I went down on Decatur Street, and I got a string to go on the banjo." After recording Down Yonder in the 1920s, Gilbert would go on and have a successful career recording many songs. In 1927, he wrote the first movie theme song ever written for a silent film called Ramona, and it led Mr. Gilbert to write further hits like Green Eyes, Peanut Vendor, and Lucky Lindy, composed about the successful solo flight across the Atlantic by Charles Lindbergh. And if you're of a certain age like me, you may remember reruns of that old Western TV show called Hopalong Cassidy. Gilbert wrote the theme lyrics for that popular show, which first aired in 1949. Now, Gilbert passed in 1970, but what makes this story remarkable is that while Gilbert never made Down Yonder that big of a hit with his first release, he actually lived long enough to see it happen, unexpectedly. even if no one else remembered who wrote it. And what's even more funny and ironic is that this Tin Pan Alley song, written by a Russian-born Jewish man living in New York City about riverboats in the Old South, would be transformed into a hoedown that actually felt more authentic in a bluegrass festival than a vaudeville stage. Well, that's the story I got of Down Yonder. Thanks for listening, folks.